Every family hides a secret. Mine tried to bury me alive on the day of my daughter's wedding. That truth hit me harder than the polished marble floor I crashed onto when the chair was ripped away beneath me. My name is Daniel Cortez, 58 years old, and I came to Eternal Gardens that April afternoon not as a guest of honor, not as a man of wealth or prestige, but simply as a father. A father who had raised his daughter alone after his wife Isabel passed. A father who believed this day, Elena's wedding, would be a moment of joy, not humiliation. The air smelled of roses and champagne. Music floated softly from the string quartet. Guests, dressed like royalty, whispered in voices that carried more judgment than kindness. I tried to blend in, wearing the same navy suit I had worn to her college graduation, a suit patched and pressed, carrying not money but memory. I reached for the chair they had placed for me. My hand touched the wood. For a moment, I thought maybe I still belonged here. And then Adrian Whitmore, my daughter's fiancé, yanked it back. In one sudden, cruel motion, the world disappeared beneath me. My back slammed against cold stone. A sharp crack echoed through the hall. Silence, then laughter, ugly. Hollow laughter spilled from tables where men and women in expensive clothes tried to turn my pain into entertainment. Adrian leaned down, his lips curled with satisfaction. His voice, low but meant for everyone to hear, cut me deeper than the fall. Your place is on the floor. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I just stayed there. One hand pressed to the marble, the other gripping the edge of the tablecloth to push myself up. Every muscle in my body burned, but I had carried heavier loads before. I had carried Elena on my shoulders through grief. I had carried brothers through fire in Iraq. I had carried myself through years of silence when the world pretended not to see me. This humiliation was sharp, but it would not break me. And then the sound that changed everything. Boots, heavy, deliberate, not polished shoes or rehearsed steps, but boots crossing marble like a soldier returning to the front. The crowd turned, the music faltered, the doors opened, and in walked Richard Whitmore, Adrian's father. His tie was crooked, his face lined, but his posture commanded the room. His eyes swept the hall until they locked onto mine. He froze, his skin went pale, and in a trembling whisper that carried more weight than a shout, he said, "Sergeant Cortez, is that you?" In that instant, the laughter died. The whispers shifted. My humiliation transformed into something else entirely: recognition, the kind that could tear apart every lie in that room. When I pushed myself off that marble floor, every muscle in my body screamed with the kind of pain only age and memory can bring. My palms slipped against the polished surface, slick with nothing but sweat and humiliation. Guests had already turned their faces, some pretending they hadn't laughed, others still smirking into their champagne glasses, but I felt their eyes crawling up my back as I straightened inch by inch. They thought I would stay down. They thought a man like me, a man who had built his life with grease under his nails and calluses on his hands, would accept his place on the floor. But I had been on worse floors than this one, and I had risen from them every time. As I stood, I wasn't just standing in Eternal Gardens, surrounded by chandeliers and silk gowns. In my mind, I was standing back in Iraq, 2 decades earlier, the night the sky burned red and the air shook with mortar fire. I could still smell the acrid smoke, still hear the rattle of gunfire bouncing off the desert dunes, still feel the weight of Richard Whitmore on my shoulders as I dragged him through the dirt. Each step a gamble against death. He had been bleeding out, his breath hot against my ear, whispering that he owed me his life, whispering that if I let him die, his son would grow up without a father. I carried him 300 yards that night, my legs crumbling, my vision blurred, my back screaming. But I carried him because that is what you do when the world tries to bury you. You rise and you carry. That memory wasn't just a war story. It was the proof that humiliation, pain, even death could be endured if you remembered why you fought in the first place. And as I looked across the wedding hall, I saw Elena's face. Her bouquet trembled in her hands. Her lips parted in silent shock. She looked at me the way she did when she was 6 years old, sitting in the corner of my garage on the little wooden chair I had built for her. That chair, painted blue because it was the only paint I had left from patching the porch, was more than furniture. It was a promise carved into wood. I had spent nights sanding those edges until my fingers blistered, not because it needed to be perfect, but because she deserved something made only for her. She would sit there with her legs dangling, too short to touch the floor, handing me wrenches too heavy for her little arms, asking what every noise in the engine meant. The smell of oil and sawdust mixed with her laughter. And in that garage, with the radio humming low, I felt the closest thing to peace a widowed man can feel. Isabel had died too soon. Cancer took her in silence, a silence so heavy it filled every corner of the house for years. On her last night, when she could barely speak, she gripped my hand with what strength she had left and whispered, "Protect her. Daniel, don't let the world harden her. Don't let life take away her light." I promised. I promised on her deathbed, with tears soaking the sheets and Elena asleep down the hall, that I would never let my daughter face the cruelty of the world alone. That promise has been the chain around my neck every day since, the invisible weight heavier than any battlefield pack. And even now, humiliated in front of strangers, that vow burned hotter than my shame. So when Adrian pulled that chair away and the crowd laughed, I didn't see marble floors and chandeliers. I saw a 6-year-old girl clinging to my sleeve, asking me if thunder was dangerous. I saw Isabel's eyes in the hospital bed, fierce even in fading light. I saw the chair I had built, the one piece of furniture that wasn't bought from a catalog but carved out of love and desperation. And I realized that this moment, this cruel attempt to reduce me to nothing, was not about me. It was about Elena. It was about showing her that even when the world tries to strip you bare, you stand, you rise, you hold dignity the way soldiers hold their rifles tight, unyielding, until your last breath. As I brushed the dust from my jacket and pulled the chair upright myself, I felt eyes shift. Some guests looked away in shame, others in discomfort, but Elena's eyes stayed locked on me. They were filled with confusion, pain, but also searching for proof that her father was not broken. I gave her a small nod, the kind I used to give before every piano recital, every graduation step, a nod that said you are safe, a nod that said your father is still here. I saw her lips tremble, her eyes glisten, and in that moment, I knew the promise I made to Isabel was not just a memory. It was alive, breathing, demanding that I endure this humiliation with my back straight and my head high. Because sometimes, the battlefield isn't covered in sand or smoke. Sometimes, it is covered in marble floors and silk gowns, and the bullets come in the form of words whispered like knives, "Your place is on the floor." But I was no stranger to battlefields. I was no stranger to carrying men who thought they couldn't walk another step. And I damn sure wasn't going to let my daughter see her father broken on the ground. I thought the humiliation at the wedding hall was enough for one lifetime. But Adrian wasn't finished with me. A week later, Elena called, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm, telling me that Adrian wanted to take us both out for dinner. "It'll be good," she said. "Just the three of us. He wants to make peace." I almost laughed. Men like Adrian don't make peace. They stage performances. Still, when your daughter asks you to show up, you show up. I ironed my old Navy suit again, the one with seams I had mended myself, and rode the subway into Manhattan. The restaurant glowed like a cathedral of glass and gold, the kind of place built to remind men like me that I didn't belong. Chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors. Waiters in white gloves moved like silent ghosts, and conversations floated like smoke, hushed and careful, the language of money. Elena waved when she saw me, her smile wide enough to calm the storm in my chest. She looked radiant, wearing a dress that shimmered under the light. For a moment, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to sit in the blue wooden chair in my garage. And then I saw Adrian. He didn't stand until the last possible second, extending his hand in a gesture that was neither warm nor cold, just calculated, His eyes flicked from my patched suit to my scuffed shoes, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, measuring my worth in numbers he could laugh at later. We sat. Elena tried to guide the conversation, talking about her job, her travels, her childhood memories. Adrian nodded politely, but his attention was fixed on me. He studied me like a case file, like a man dissecting something under glass. Finally, he leaned back, fingers steepled, lips curved in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So, Mr. Cortez," he said, "you work with your hands. That must be satisfying." I swallowed the bitterness. "I'm a mechanic," I said simply. "I fix things that are broken." "How refreshing," he murmured, his voice dripping sarcasm. "Different world, I suppose. I manage portfolios, high-stakes investments. Not much grease under the nails there." He chuckled softly, waiting for me to shrink. But I didn't. Different worlds didn't mean different worths. Elena jumped in quickly, her tone light, desperate to fill the silence. "Dad rebuilt his motorcycle from scratch. It's amazing." Adrian's eyes slid to her, then back to me. "Dangerous hobby for a man your age? Isn't it different generations, different risks?" His words weren't questions. They were subtle blades, each one dipped in mockery. I let them pass. I had learned long ago that silence often cuts deeper than shouting. But Adrian wasn't satisfied. He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to make Elena strain to hear. "Your daughter tells me about your neighborhood Brooklyn. Very working class. I imagine the sense of community must compensate for the limitations." My grip tightened around my fork. What limitations? My voice was steady, though inside I felt fire crawling beneath my skin. He smiled wider. "Oh, nothing specific. Just that once you experience certain standards, it becomes difficult to appreciate simpler pleasures. But that's generational. I think," Elena laughed nervously, trying to bridge the canyon opening between us. "Dad appreciates nice things too." "Of course he does," Adrian interrupted smoothly, dismissing her with a glance. "But we all know different perspectives matter. That's what makes families interesting." The waiter arrived, menus in hand, but Adrian waved him off. "Wine first, the 2009 Bordeaux, bottle service." He didn't ask if I wanted wine. He ordered, the way men like him order everything. The meal arrived in small, beautiful portions that looked more like artwork than food. I ate slowly, chewing each bite as if patience could dull the edge of his arrogance. And then it came the trap. So perfectly timed it almost impressed me. The waiter returned with the check, slipping the leather folder discreetly by Adrian's elbow. Adrian opened it with exaggerated surprise, then slid it across the table toward me. His voice was low, but loud enough for Elena to hear. "Tradition, the bride's father pays." The number glared up at me, $347, more than a week's groceries, more than I could justify on a single meal. Elena's face drained of color. "Adrian, that's not necessary." "Nonsense, sweetheart," he said smoothly, his hand resting on hers as if he were the picture of charm. "Your father wants to show his support. Don't you, Mr. Cortez?" The silence stretched taut as a wire. The restaurant buzzed with laughter from other tables. Glasses clinked, silverware tapped, but at ours there was only weight. My leather wallet felt heavy in my pocket, worn smooth by years of use. The wallet of a working man. I pulled it out slowly, my hands steady though my chest burned. I placed the card down. "It's fine, princess." Adrian leaned back, triumphant, sipping his wine as though he had won something. The waiter returned moments later with the receipt. I signed it carefully, each stroke a battle I refused to lose. The tip stung, but I gave it anyway, because dignity sometimes costs more than money. Elena's eyes shimmered with shame and something else, anger, confusion, doubt. "Thank you for dinner," Adrian said brightly, as if he had done me a favor. "I'm sure Elena appreciates seeing how well her two favorite men get along." His words dripped with casual cruelty, each syllable twisting deeper. He wasn't just testing me, he was testing her. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the war beginning in her eyes. She wanted to defend him, to believe the man she loved wasn't capable of such calculated humiliation. But the seed had been planted, the seed of doubt. It was there in the way her lips trembled, in the way her hands shook when she reached for her glass. And seeds, once planted, don't disappear. They grow. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the marble, the sound echoing louder than it should have. I placed my jacket over my arm, nodded once to my daughter, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the night air cut through me like glass. Neon lights reflected on wet pavement. Each step felt heavy, but inside me, something shifted. Adrian thought he had won. He thought humiliation was power. But I had seen power crumble under fire. I had seen arrogance bleed out in the desert. And I knew men like him always overplay their hand. Tonight, he made me pay a bill. One day, he would pay the price. It was late. Far too late for polite visits. I had just turned off the lamp in my living room, the old house creaking into silence the way it always did, when the pounding came. Not a knock, not the hesitant tap of a neighbor, a fist hammering against the wood so hard the frame rattled. I froze for a second, my instincts prickling like they used to in the desert when danger lurked just beyond the dunes. Visitors didn't come unannounced in my neighborhood, not at this hour. The pounding came again. My porch light flicked on, triggered by the motion. Through the glass I saw him, Adrian Whitmore. His expensive coat clung to his shoulders, his perfect hair was slightly out of place, and his face, usually smooth with practiced charm, was twisted with something raw, not confidence. Rage. I opened the door slowly, deliberately. He didn't wait for an invitation. He shoved past me, his cologne trailing behind him, heavy and suffocating, mixing with the faint smell of coffee and motor oil that lingered in my home. His shoes struck the hardwood like gunfire as he stormed into the center of my living room. He spun around, eyes wild, lips trembling between fury and fear. "We need to talk," he snapped. I closed the door with a quiet click. About what my voice was calm. The same calm I had used years ago when facing down chaos in places where calm meant survival. "Don't play dumb with me." He pointed a manicured finger at my chest, his voice rising louder than it needed to be, as if sheer volume could disguise the crack in his confidence. "Elena's different. She's asking questions. She's having doubts. And I know it's because of you. You've been poisoning her against me." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, poisoning her, or telling her the truth. His jaw clenched, his nostrils flared. He stepped closer, trying to use his height the way some men use weapons. But I had seen real intimidation. I had stood in front of men with rifles and dead eyes. This wasn't intimidation. This was theater. "You told her I was disrespectful, that I don't value family, that I'm some kind of monster." His laugh was brittle, breaking, "And she believes you. She actually believes you." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I told her what I observed. Nothing more, nothing less. For a moment, he stared at me, eyes burning. Then his lips curled into a bitter smile. "She's mine," he spat. "She's an acquisition. A step. Something I've earned. And you," he jabbed his finger again. "Trembling now, you are in my way." The words landed heavy, uglier than anything he had said before. I felt the silence between us swell, as though the walls themselves recoiled. He had finally stripped off the mask. He hadn't said fiancé. He hadn't said partner. He had said acquisition. I straightened slowly, my eyes never leaving his. "Elena is not property," I said, each word steady, deliberate. "She doesn't belong to anyone." He flinched, just slightly, but enough. I saw it, the first crack in the armor of arrogance. The truth is, men like Adrian aren't driven by love or even by pride. They're driven by fear. Fear of being ordinary. fear of being powerless, fear of being unseen. And when fear drives a man, cruelty follows. His face flushed red, his voice pitched higher, desperation creeping in where arrogance once lived. You don't understand. I've worked too hard to get here. I won't let some washed-up mechanic ruin everything I've built. I let the words settle. And what exactly have you built? I asked quietly. He gestured around my modest living room as if it were evidence in a trial. Success, money, a future, things you wouldn't understand. Real achievement, not this. His hand swept over the worn couch, the family photos, the picture of Isabel in her wedding dress on the mantel. I looked at him, then at those photos, then back at him. This, I said, my voice low, is a daughter who knows she's loved unconditionally. This is bedtime stories, scraped knees, piano recitals, and college tuition paid in overtime hours. This is what actual achievement looks like. Sentimental garbage, he shot back, though his voice had lost its sharp edge. The world doesn't run on bedtime stories. Old man, it runs on power, money, and knowing how to use both. Maybe your world does, I replied, shifting slightly, not threatening, just enough to remind him whose house he stood in. But Elena comes from a different one. Sweat dotted his forehead, despite the cool night air drifting through the open window. He tugged at his collar, suddenly uncomfortable in his $1,000 suit. She'll choose me, he said, his words sounding more like a plea than a declaration. When it comes down to it, she'll choose the life I can give her. I let the silence hang, then asked, will she? His body tensed. For a moment, I thought he might swing at me. His fists curled, his shoulders shook, but something held him back. Maybe the way I stood, steady and unmoving. Maybe some instinct deep inside warning him that he was out of his depth. This isn't over, he muttered finally, his voice cracking. Elena's mine. She chose me, not you. Elena isn't property, I said again. She doesn't belong to anyone. He turned sharply, storming toward the door. His hand lingered on the knob before he glanced back one last time. His face was pale now, drained, his eyes wide with something he didn't want me to see, fear. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he hissed. Actually, I said softly, I think I do. He slammed the door behind him. His car engine roared down the street, then faded into the distance. The house fell into silence again, the kind of silence that comes after a storm, thick and heavy, carrying the promise of more to come. I walked to the mantel, my eyes resting on Isabel's photograph. I reached under my shirt, pulling the chain with her ring into the open. The gold was warm against my palm. I promised you, I whispered. I'll protect her. And as the night settled in, I realized the battle had shifted. Adrian wasn't just arrogant. He was desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. But I had faced danger before, and I was still standing. After Adrian stormed out of my house that night, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the old picture frames, I stood in silence for a long time. The air felt heavy, as though his arrogance had left a stain in the room. I kept replaying his words, the way he called Elena an acquisition, like she was a business deal instead of a woman. My daughter, flesh of my flesh. That night I barely slept. I listened to the clock tick in the living room, each second dragging like the scrape of a blade. By dawn, I knew one thing: I couldn't face this war alone. It started small, as whispers always do. Mrs. Morales, my neighbor who had lived on the block as long as I had, stopped me outside the bakery one morning. She clutched a bag of warm bread in her hand, but her eyes darted nervously, as though speaking the words might summon trouble. Mr. Cortez, she whispered. I overheard something at the cafe near Elena's office. That young man, Adrian, he said Brooklyn is a place you grow out of. He laughed, said Elena was just another step, like she was something to buy, not someone to love. The words hit me harder than I expected. I nodded, thanked her, and forced a smile. But inside my blood burned. A few days later, Hector, another neighbor, a man who had fixed roofs and mowed lawns beside me for years, approached while I was working in my garage. He shifted uncomfortably before he spoke. I heard him too. Daniel, heard him bragging downtown. He called Elena an acquisition, said once the wedding's over, she'll forget this place. Forget us. Forget you. He shook his head. That boy doesn't respect what he has. He only respects what he can own. Hector walked away, leaving me alone with the sound of my tools and the weight of those words. Ownership, acquisition, property. Adrian wasn't even trying to hide what he thought of Elena anymore. And the neighborhood, the people who had watched her grow up, who had seen her ride her bike down cracked sidewalks and sell lemonade in summer, now knew the truth too. The whispers became a chorus, and each one chipped away at the mask Adrian wore in front of her. But I needed more than whispers. I needed proof. That's when I remembered Thomas Vega. Thomas and I had served together overseas. He was the kind of man you trusted to cover your back when bullets flew. The kind of soldier who stayed calm when everything else burned. After the war, he became a lawyer, trading camouflage for suits. But he still carried that same steady presence. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but when I found him at a quiet bar near downtown, it was like no time had passed. He studied me over his glass, eyes narrowing. You look like a man with a weight on your shoulders. Daniel, I told him everything. The wedding, the pulled chair, the laughter, the dinner, the check slid across the table, the confrontation in my house. I told him about the whispers, the word acquisition, the way Elena's face had started to change when she looked at Adrian. Thomas didn't interrupt. He just listened, nodding occasionally, his lawyer's mind filing away details, his soldier's heart understanding what I didn't say out loud. When I finished, he leaned in. Adrian Whitmore, he said slowly. I've heard that name. A few months back, I handled a case involving a firm downtown. Guess whose name came up? He nearly cost the company millions. Shady investments, bending rules until they almost snapped. They buried it to protect the family name. But inside the firm, his reputation is mud. He's reckless. And reckless men always leave a trail. I sat back, exhaling. So it wasn't just arrogance. It wasn't just cruelty. He was dangerous in other ways too. Dangerous with money, with power, with people. Does Elena know? I asked. Thomas shook his head. Of course not. He'd never let her. Men like him build walls of charm and money to keep women blind until it's too late. He paused, then added, You can't fight this with fists. Daniel, you need patience, proof, and when the time comes, let the truth speak for itself. That night I returned home with something I hadn't felt in weeks resolve. I wasn't alone anymore. I had neighbors who saw through Adrian's mask, and now I had Thomas, a soldier turned lawyer, steady as ever, standing beside me. But the strongest blow came from someone I didn't expect. Margaret Whitmore, Adrian's aunt. She approached me quietly after a rehearsal dinner, her expression stern, her eyes sharp as steel. She waited until Adrian was across the room, charming guest with his hollow laughter, before she spoke. You're right to be worried, she said. Her voice was low, urgent. I've watched Adrian grow up. He was always ambitious, always reaching higher. But lately, there's something darker in him, something the family can't control. Her words struck me like a thunderclap, coming from a Whitmore. It wasn't gossip. It was a confession. Why tell me this now? I asked. Because tomorrow, when Elena walks down that aisle, she won't just be marrying him. She'll be marrying his shadow. And once it takes her, it won't let go. She glanced at me one last time before slipping away, leaving me with her warning ringing in my ears. That night, I sat in my living room, the clock ticking louder than ever. Each second was a countdown to the wedding, each chime a reminder of how little time was left. And then Elena came to me. She didn't knock. She never had to. She stepped into the room, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can do this." She collapsed into my arms, trembling the way she had when she was 8, and scraped her knee. I held her close, stroking her hair, whispering the same words I always had. "You're not alone. You'll never be alone." The clock on the mantel struck midnight, each note echoing through the silence. 12 beats. 12 reminders that time was slipping away. I looked down at Elena, curled against me, and I knew tomorrow, the world would be watching. Tomorrow, everything would break open. The morning of the wedding broke sharp and bright, the kind of April day when the sky looks scrubbed clean, as if mocking the weight pressing down on my chest. I dressed in the same navy suit, the one patched more times than I cared to admit, and rode quietly to Eternal Gardens. By the time I arrived, the lawns were set with white chairs, arches heavy with roses, and guests dressed like polished jewels under the spring sun. They gathered in clusters, glasses of champagne in hand, voices hushed with the kind of conversations that only belong to people who never worry about bills or overtime. I kept to the edges, my place always on the margins. I wasn't here for them. I was here for Elena. When I saw her walking down the aisle, radiant in the altered dress that had once belonged to Isabel, my throat tightened. My late wife's lace, my daughter's light past and present sewn together in one fragile, heartbreaking vision. I told myself I would endure whatever came, if only to see her smile. The vows were spoken. The kiss was shared. Applause rippled through the hall, polite and controlled, the sound of a performance rather than a celebration. Then came the reception. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Tables draped in linen white as snow. The string quartet played softly, their music elegant but forgettable, the kind you can't hum 5 minutes later. Waiters floated by with trays of wine, their footsteps rehearsed like dancers. I found my place card table 12, far from the head table, tucked between strangers and an elderly aunt. A placement not by accident, but by design. I sat quietly, listening to stories I wasn't a part of, nodding when spoken to, eating food that was beautiful but meaningless. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd make it through the night unseen, but Adrian wasn't finished. When I rose to join another table, a guest had called me over to share a memory of Elena. As a child, I reached for my chair to slide it back under me. In that split second, the chair vanished. My knees buckled, my body pitched backward, and I hit the polished marble floor with a sickening crack. The clink of glasses cut off. Conversation strangled mid-sentence. And then laughter. It started small, nervous chuckles, then spread like a disease. Above me stood Adrian, his hand still on the back of the chair, his smile sharp, a blade hidden behind white teeth. "Oops," he said too loudly, his voice cutting across the room. "Looks like someone's a bit unsteady on his feet." Age catches us all eventually. More laughter, hesitant but cruel, filled the silence he had left behind. I stayed down longer than I needed to, not because I was hurt, but because I wanted the weight of that silence to sink into the room, into every guest, into every whisper. And as I braced myself to stand, I heard it, the sound that would change everything. Boots, heavy, deliberate, crossing marble like a soldier returning to the front line. The doors opened. Richard Whitmore walked in. His tie was slightly askew, his posture upright but weary, his presence commanding like a general stepping into a battlefield. His eyes scanned the scene guests frozen in shock, my body rising from the floor, Adrian standing smug above me. Then his gaze landed on me. He froze, his color drained, his lips parted, trembling, and then, before anyone else could speak, he whispered words that cracked through the hall like thunder. "This man saved my life in Iraq." The laughter died instantly. Forks clinked onto plates. The string quartet lowered their bows, frozen mid-song. Every eye turned to Richard, then to me. He stepped forward, his voice louder now, carrying across the chandeliers in white linen. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, pointing directly at me, his hands shaking not with weakness but with reverence. This is Sergeant Daniel Cortez. In 2003, under fire in Iraq, he carried me 300 yards through gunfire when everyone else thought I was lost. I'm standing here today because of him. Gasps rippled through the room. Some guests pressed hands to their mouths. Others bowed their heads slightly, as if reminded they were in the presence of something larger than champagne and silk gowns. Elena's bouquet fell from her hands, roses scattering across the marble like drops of blood. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me not with pity, but with pride. Adrian staggered back, his chair clattering to the floor. The smug smile slipped off his face, replaced first with confusion, then dawning horror. For months, he had mocked me, humiliated me, called me a simple man. But now the mask was gone, and everyone could see it, the boy behind the arrogance, cornered and small. Richard's voice rose again, breaking through the silence. You humiliated this man, the very man who gave me my life. You treated him as though he were beneath you, when the truth is, you'll never stand as tall as he already has. The guests shifted, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Words that had once been whispered as jokes, simple man, acquisition, floor now carried new weight. They weren't humor anymore. They were evidence. I finally stood, brushing off my jacket, my voice steady and calm as it carried across the room. Respect isn't given by money, it's earned. The words landed heavy, rippling through the silence. Elena's tears spilled over, but her chin lifted high. Her eyes met mine, clear and certain now. Adrian opened his mouth, desperation in his tone. I was afraid, he stammered, afraid I could never measure up. So I tore him down before he could tear me down. His confession hung fragile in the air, but it was too late. The truth had already shifted the ground beneath his feet. Richard shook his head. Margaret, his sister, rose from her seat, her voice sharp as steel. He has shamed us all. And me, I looked at Adrian, his face pale, his perfect posture broken. Then I said the words that had burned in me since that first fall. You wanted me on the floor, but understand this, men like me don't stay there. We rise. And when we rise, we don't do it to crush others. We rise to hold up those we love. The hall erupted not in laughter this time, but in applause. Guests rose to their feet, clapping not for the wedding, not for the spectacle, but for the truth finally revealed. Adrian stood frozen, hollow, drowning in the storm of sound. His world of arrogance and control crumbled under the weight of history, gratitude, and honor. And for the first time in years, I saw Elena's face filled not with doubt, not with shame, but with certainty. Certainty that her father was no burden, no embarrassment, no simple man. He was a soldier. He was her protector. He was her truth. The silence after Richard's words was crushing. The kind of silence that weighs heavier than sound, pressing down on everyone in that chandelier-lit hall. I stood tall, my jacket still dusty from the fall, my body aching but my voice steady. All eyes were on me, but I wasn't the one who mattered in that moment. It was Elena. She stood there in her mother's altered lace dress, tears cutting lines down her cheeks, bouquet long forgotten on the floor. Her gaze shifted from me to Adrian, and I saw at the exact moment when the illusion broke. Adrian's lips moved, forming words that never came. His face had drained of color, his perfect posture wilted, his polished mask in shards on the marble floor. He looked not like a groom, not like a man, but like a boy caught stealing, a boy exposed in front of everyone he had tried to impress. And then Elena spoke. Her voice trembled at first, but as the words left her lips, they grew stronger, clearer, slicing through the thick silence like a blade. Love doesn't humiliate, it builds. Gasps spread across the hall. Some guests turned their faces. Others leaned forward as though they couldn't believe what they had just heard. My daughter, the woman Adrian thought he could control. The woman he treated as a possession wasn't standing beside him anymore. She was standing above him, free of him. Slowly, deliberately, she slipped the ring off her finger. The diamond that had once sparkled like a promise now glinted like broken glass in her hand. She placed it on the table between them with a soft click that sounded louder than thunder. Adrian staggered a step forward, hand outstretched. Elena, wait. But she shook her head, her chin high, her voice unwavering now. You don't love me. You never did. You love control. You love the way people look at you when you pretend to be more than you are. But love doesn't tear people down. It doesn't laugh at a father who raised me alone, who gave everything so I could stand here today. Love builds. And you destroy. The crowd was silent, the kind of silence that tells you nothing will ever be the same again. Margaret, Adrian's aunt, rose from her chair. Her eyes were sharp, her voice like steel cutting through velvet. He has shamed us all, she said. I warned the family, but no one listened. This darkness has been with him for years, and now it has poisoned us in front of the world. Richard's face was a storm. His jaw was tight, his eyes hollow with disappointment. The man I had once carried through fire now stared at his son as if he no longer recognized him. He took a step back, shaking his head slowly. You are not the man I raised, he whispered, loud enough for the room to hear. And then he turned his back to Adrian. That turn was louder than any condemnation. It was abandonment, the severing of the one bond he thought would always shield him. Adrian stood alone, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting around the hall like a trapped animal. But there was no escape. Whispers began to ripple through the guest's acquisition, humiliation, betrayal. The same words he had once used as weapons were now chains wrapping around him, dragging him down. People who had laughed moments earlier now looked away, ashamed of their own complicity. Some guests stared at me, not with pity, but with something heavier respect. I looked at Elena, and for the first time that night, she met my eyes with clarity. The confusion was gone, the shame gone too. What remained was resolve. She stepped to my side, slipping her hand into mine, her grip steady, unshakable. Together we stood, not as father and bride giving her away, but as father and daughter reclaiming what had been nearly stolen her dignity, my honor, our truth. By the time the night ended, the wedding had dissolved into something else entirely. There was no music, no dancing, no celebration. Guests left quietly, some shaking my hand, others offering Elena soft words of comfort, while no one dared meet Adrian's eyes. He sat slumped at a table, the discarded ring still gleaming before him, his empire of arrogance crumbling in real time. The next morning, the headlines had already spread. Whitmore, wedding scandal. Groom humiliates father. Exposed as fraud. Social media carried the story faster than the truth could be controlled. Videos surfaced, someone had recorded Richard's words. Elena's declaration. My own calm response. Millions watched. Millions shared. The name Whitmore, once associated with money and power, was now tied to disgrace. Adrian became a punchline, the man who lost not only his bride but his mask of superiority in front of hundreds. Richard's business associates distanced themselves. Margaret's warning echoed through every article, and the Whitmore family's reputation collapsed like a house of cards. For years, they had thrived on image, but in one night, image betrayed them. And me somehow in the chaos. I became something I never asked to be, a symbol. People spoke of dignity, of resilience, of a father who had endured humiliation but stood tall, who had been mocked as a simple man yet revealed as a soldier, a protector, a man of honor. Neighbors nodded to me on the street, strangers sent letters, veterans reached out with their own stories. I hadn't sought any of it, but it came anyway, washing over me like a tide I couldn't stop. Still, beneath the noise, What mattered was simpler. Elena was safe. She was free. She had seen the truth before it was too late. And as she sat with me the morning after, her head resting on my shoulder, her eyes swollen but calm, I whispered the words I had carried for decades. You'll never be alone, princess, not as long as I breathe. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, no longer a countdown but a rhythm of survival. The Whitmores had lost their empire of pride. Adrian had lost his mask, but I had kept my promise. Isabel's ring, warm against my chest, reminded me of the vow I made long ago to protect our daughter, and for the first time in years, I felt I had fulfilled it. In the days that followed the wedding, silence took on a different weight. It wasn't the silence of humiliation anymore, nor the silence of being ignored in a room full of polished laughter. It was the silence of aftermath, the heavy quiet that follows when truth detonates in the middle of a lie. The city kept moving, cars honking, trains rattling through Brooklyn, but inside my house the air felt still, almost sacred. The scandal had spread faster than even I expected. Newspapers carried Richard's trembling words. This man saved my life in Iraq. Video clips of Elena's declaration, "Love doesn't humiliate." It builds went viral. The world didn't just witness a wedding ruined, they witnessed the unraveling of a mask. Adrian Whitmore became a name whispered with disgust. The Whitmore family, once untouchable, carried a stain that money couldn't wash away. But I didn't speak to him. I didn't go looking for him, didn't demand an apology, didn't waste breath on the kind of man who already condemned himself with his own arrogance. Instead, I spoke to myself, or maybe I spoke to something larger, to the empty chair in my living room, the one Isabel once sat in, to the gold ring that hung warm against my chest, to Elena, even when she wasn't listening, even when she was asleep down the hall trying to piece together her future. I sat one night with the old clock ticking, the Harley gleaming half-assembled under the dim light of the garage, and I whispered the words that had carried me through every humiliation. Men like me don't stay on the floor. We rise. The sound of it filled the space, firm and steady. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even defiance. It was truth. A truth forged in deserts halfway across the world, in greasy garages where I built a life bolt by bolt, in quiet nights where I held my daughter's tiny hand and promised she'd never be alone. I knew Adrian would hear those words eventually, not from my lips, but from the world itself. They would echo in headlines, in whispers at his back, in the cold stares of people who once clapped him on the shoulder, but now crossed the street. That was enough. I didn't need to stand in front of him again. The message was already delivered. You tried to put me on the floor, but I rose, and I always will. Neighbors began to stop me on the street. Mrs. Morales pressed fresh bread into my hands with tears in her eyes. Hector nodded from his porch, his gaze carrying the kind of respect that doesn't need words. Even strangers approached me at the garage, men and women I'd never seen before. Some veterans, some just fathers, all of them saying the same thing in different ways. You reminded us what dignity looks like. I never asked for it, never wanted to be anyone's symbol, but maybe that's what happens when truth refuses to bow. It becomes a mirror, showing people what they've forgotten about themselves. Late one evening, Elena sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where she once spread her homework while I cooked cheap spaghetti. She reached across, her hand warm against mine. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm sorry you had to go through all of that." I shook my head. "Don't be sorry, princess. None of this broke me. It showed me I was never broken." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes still red from nights of crying, but softer now, steadier. "You're stronger than anyone I know," she said. I smiled faintly. "No, I'm just a man who learned to stand back up." The words hung between us, quiet but unshakable. They weren't just for her, they were for me, too. For the boy I once was, terrified in the desert. For the widower I became, staring at a silent bed where Isabel once slept. For the father who spent years alone in a garage, holding on to promises that felt heavier than steel. And yeah, for Adrian too. Even if he never admitted it, he needed to know, even if only in silence, that men like me, fathers, soldiers, mechanics, survivors, do not stay down. We rise. Days later, I stood in church on a quiet Sunday morning. The pews smelled of old wood and candle wax, the kind of smell that reminds you of time itself. I didn't go there often, but something pulled me in that day. I sat in the back, listening to the hum of voices, watching families gather, and I realized that what happened at the wedding wasn't just about me. It was about every man who has been laughed at for being ordinary, every father mocked for not being rich enough, every promise dismissed as weakness. We all rise, sometimes quietly, sometimes in front of the world, but always with dignity intact. When I left the church, the sunlight hit me square in the face. I touched the ring around my neck, Isabel's ring, and spoke softly as though she could hear me. I was never weak. I was never a burden. I was always my own man. The words were mine, but they belonged to her too, and to Elena, and to anyone who had ever been told their place was on the floor. I don't know where Adrian is now, maybe hiding behind closed doors, maybe drinking himself numb, maybe plotting ways to claw back the respect he lost. But it doesn't matter, because no matter what he does, no matter how loud he shouts or how many walls of money he builds around himself, the truth is louder. The truth is permanent. The truth is that when he pulled the chair away from me, he didn't just humiliate me, he revealed himself. And when Richard stood and said I saved his life, when Elena slipped off her ring and said love builds, not destroys, the world saw what I always knew: I rise, and I always will. As Elena and I walked out of that hall, hand in hand, the noise behind us faded into nothing. There was no music, no laughter, only the hollow silence of a broken spectacle. The cool night air wrapped around us, sharp and clean, and for the first time in years I felt something lift from my chest. Elena's grip was steady, her head high, her steps in rhythm with mine. She was no longer the bride trapped in someone else's story. She was my daughter again, her dignity intact, her light preserved. The street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement, and as we stepped into the night, I felt the small weight of Isabel's ring resting warm against my chest. It caught the light, glimmering faintly as if she were walking beside us. I touched it with my free hand, my thumb brushing the gold, and whispered softly, words carried only to her Isabel. I kept my promise. In that moment, everything else, the humiliation, the laughter, the whispers, dissolved. What remained was simple, unshakable truth. My dignity had not been taken. My daughter had not been lost. The vow I made on Isabel's last night was fulfilled. I had stood my ground. I had risen from the floor, and I had shown Elena and the world that men like me do not break. Elena leaned her head against my shoulder as we walked. Thank you, Dad, she whispered, but she didn't need to thank me. Protecting her was never a choice. It was who I was, who I had always been, and now she knew it. We left the Whitmore name behind us in that glittering hall, its power shattered, its arrogance exposed. But we carried with us something stronger than any empire of wealth honor. Father and daughter, walking side by side, scarred but unbroken, and as I looked up at the stars faintly visible through the city lights, I knew the truth my story carried. Family betrayal can destroy trust, but dignity earned, protected, defended restores the soul. If this story struck something in you, if you've ever fought to rise when the world wanted you to stay down, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Share this story with someone who needs it. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of truth, betrayal, and resilience. Because stories like this aren't just about me. They're about all of us. And together we rise.